They thought she was just another invisible worker in the building. A woman carrying trays, pouring coffee, forgotten the moment she left the room. But behind her silence lived a mind sharper than the very executives running the company. On the day Apex Meridian prepared to pitch a $750 million merger, every camera, every investor, every decision-maker was watching. It was supposed to be flawless. It was supposed to secure the future of the company. Yet, hidden in the numbers, buried inside the projections, was a mistake so devastating it could destroy everything. She saw it. She knew it. But who would listen to a woman in a caterer's uniform? What happened next would not only shake the entire boardroom, it would force the world to remember a name they had long erased: Judith Adams. Before we continue with this inspiring story, let us know where you are watching from in the comment. Hit the subscription button now to get notification for more interesting stories. The skyscraper of Apex Meridian gleamed against the morning sun, a temple of glass and steel where billion-dollar deals were signed with a handshake and ruined with a smile. Executives strode through its marble lobby with the kind of confidence that came from power. Shoes polished like mirrors. Watches worth more than cars. Voices clipped and urgent, as though the fate of the world waited in their briefcases. And somewhere among them, unnoticed, was Judith Adams. She carried a tray of silver thermoses, moving swiftly and silently, dressed in the dark uniform of a corporate caterer. People brushed past her as though she were part of the furniture. They didn't look at her face. They didn't even notice when she stepped aside to let them through. Judith had grown used to it, the art of being unseen. She had perfected it. But invisibility wasn't the same as emptiness. Behind her calm expression, her mind was alive. Numbers danced there the way music lives in a violin. Ratios, sequences, equations. She didn't need a calculator. She carried one in her head. The way an executive's cufflinks reflected light told her the angle of the sun. The arrangement of pastries on the catering table instantly formed a geometric pattern in her mind, broken into precise quadrants without her trying. Judith didn't flaunt it. She didn't dare. The executives only wanted her to refill coffee, not correct their financial projections. And besides, no one in this tower would ever imagine that the quiet caterer once held the promise of a brilliant career. She slipped into the 41st floor conference room, where preparations for the day's historic pitch were already underway. Screens lit the walls. Graphs, charts, and cascading numbers filled them. Assistants rushed, executives rehearsed, and in the chaos, Judith set down trays of coffee, biscuits, and chilled water. No one looked her way. A senior partner brushed past, his phone pressed to his ear, muttering numbers. He missed one digit. Judith caught it instantly. Wrong. Off by a fraction. She didn't correct him. She only pressed the tray tighter against her side and kept moving. Her eyes flicked briefly to the screens. Lines of projections scrolled across them. Financial models built for today's $750 million merger pitch. The air buzzed with expectation, but something in the numbers snagged at her like a splinter. A fraction. A miscalculation. She blinked, shook it off, and moved toward the door. She was here to serve coffee, not solutions. Judith Adams had learned long ago, in a tower like this, truth didn't belong to people like her. The apartment was small, the kind of place where every piece of furniture told a story of necessity rather than choice. The hum of the refrigerator mingled with the distant sounds of the city, honking taxis, footsteps, muffled conversations, but inside, it was quiet, almost sacred. Judith Adams stood at the counter, chopping vegetables for dinner, her movements precise, almost mechanical. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. Every slice reminded her of what she had given up. The scholarship she had earned. The international competitions. The papers she had drafted and perfected, only to have doors close one by one when her mother fell ill. Every lost opportunity weighed on her shoulders like a mountain she refused to name aloud. A soft laugh broke her reverie. David Adams, her younger brother, was sprawled on the couch with a pile of textbooks and a laptop, scribbling furiously. He was 18, bright-eyed, full of hope and that reckless courage only the young possess. "Judith, can you check this equation?" he asked, barely looking up. "I'm trying to figure out my scholarship essay," But my numbers don't make sense. She wiped her hands on a towel and joined him, kneeling beside the couch. Her fingers traced the calculations, her mind instantly spotting the error. You've misread the variable sequence, she said softly. It's an easy fix. See here? David's brow furrowed as he followed her guidance. He didn't notice the flash of something deeper in her eyes, the way her own brilliance lingered in her hands even after years of silence. He saw only the sister who had always been there, quietly correcting, quietly guiding, quietly sacrificing. I don't know how you do it, David murmured after a moment. You make it look so simple. Judith smiled faintly, a shadow crossing her expression. I had to, she whispered. When Mom got sick, when everything collapsed, someone had to keep us afloat. I didn't have time to worry about proving myself. The weight of those years pressed into the room, palpable. The nights she had stayed awake calculating budgets while David slept. The applications she had withdrawn, one by one, never telling him why. The dreams she had buried beneath the routines of life because survival demanded more than ambition. David finally looked up, sensing the tension she had long hidden. Judith, you could have gone back, you know, he said softly, almost afraid to hope. You're too smart to have given all that up. She shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. I did what I had to, she said. But you don't have to give up. That's why I push you, even when it annoys you. He smiled, a mix of gratitude and guilt. Judith's chest tightened. He didn't know the nights she had cried alone, the doors she had closed forever, the life she had traded so he could breathe. She had sacrificed her brilliance so he could have his chance. And yet, in his small voice, she heard hope, hope that somehow, her lost paths could be rewritten in him. The kitchen smelled faintly of garlic and onions, a simple dinner simmering. Judith poured herself a glass of water, watching David from across the room. The past was a shadow she could never fully shake, but for the first time in years the elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the 42nd floor of Apex Meridian, a landscape of glass panels, chrome fixtures, and polished ambition. The corridor hummed with the rhythm of controlled chaos. Assistants scuttled past with stacks of documents, IT technicians whispered in front of monitors, and executives in sharp suits spoke in clipped tones, as though their words could carve decisions from thin air. At the end of the hallway, in the corner office with a panoramic view of the city, stood Damian Cross, the CEO. He was a man built for perception, tall, impeccably tailored, hair swept back with the precision of a ruler. His eyes were sharp, cold, always calculating. Every movement radiated authority, every gesture demanded obedience. If the building itself was a monument to money, Damian was its unyielding apex. Today, the stakes had never been higher. A $750 million merger hung on a single presentation, one pitch that would define Apex Meridian's future. Investors from 3 continents were on standby, cameras poised, screens ready to broadcast the boardroom to hundreds of eyes that measured success in millions. Damian adjusted his tie in the reflection of the glass wall. He had rehearsed this moment for weeks, memorized every slide, anticipated every question. Perfection was expected, and failure was unthinkable. Around him, senior executives gathered, murmuring about contingency plans, double-checking numbers, and rechecking every detail. The air was thick with tension, so thick it seemed to hum with pressure. A young analyst, Riley Torres, approached cautiously, holding a tablet. Damian, the final projections are loaded. The client deck is ready for the stream. All variables synced. Damian nodded without looking. Good. And no mistakes this time. If there's even a whisper of inconsistency, this deal dies before it starts. His voice was calm but carried the weight of threat. The pause. Remember, every investor on that call will be scrutinizing us. They don't just want numbers, they want confidence. Show weakness and they will smell it. This is Apex Meridian's moment. Outside the office, assistants scurried, double-checking cameras and microphones. Screens flashed live feeds from remote investors. Countdown timers ticked softly in the background, silent metronomes marking the approach of destiny. Damian's presence was magnetic, a force that seemed to bend the room toward him. Conversations dropped when he entered, keyboards paused, pens hovered in midair. People deferred, smiled, nodded. The CEO was not just a leader, he was a colossus, a man whose pride was built on meticulous control. But beneath that veneer, there was a flicker of unease, a whisper only he could feel. This deal was monumental. Any misstep would not just cost money, it could unravel everything he had built. And yet, despite the orchestration, the polished confidence, the rehearsed smiles, Damien was not infallible. Even in a room where every detail was curated, every variable considered, the margin for error existed. A single wrong number, a single oversight, could shatter the empire he had spent a lifetime constructing. As he surveyed the room, Damien allowed himself a quiet, controlled breath. The city stretched below like a grid of lights and ambition. Everything depended on what would happen in the next hour. Apex Meridian's future, his reputation, the weight of millions of dollars, all balanced on the edge of precision and on the unknown. She allowed herself a small flicker of warmth. Someone had to fight for the future. And she would fight, silently, invisibly, until the right moment came. Until the world finally had no choice but to see her. Judith Adams moved silently along the polished floor of Apex Meridian's 42nd floor executive suite, balancing her tray of coffee with the ease of long practice. The air buzzed with urgency, soft clicks of keyboards, whispered debates, the low hum of monitors feeding live data to the investors waiting in cyberspace. Executives hovered over screens, their eyes darting across graphs and spreadsheets as though sheer willpower could fix the numbers. Her gaze lingered for a moment on the main projection screen, where a complex revenue model scrolled in real time. Something caught her attention. A fraction of a coefficient, subtle enough that the untrained eye would never notice, yet glaring to someone who had memorized these patterns in her youth. A growth multiplier was misaligned. Customer retention variables didn't match the projected churn rate. It was a single miscalculation, yet one that could cascade disastrously across the $750 million forecast. Judith's fingers tightened around the tray. Her instincts screamed at her, "This is wrong. This will fail." She shifted her weight, hesitant. The temptation to speak was irresistible, but caution had been her companion for years. She couldn't risk being dismissed before the moment had arrived. Yet instinct won. Leaning just slightly toward the open doorway of the main conference room, she tried a subtle approach. "Excuse me," her voice was soft, almost a whisper. A few heads turned, curious. Damien Cross, standing tall at the head of the room, narrowed his eyes. "Yes." His tone was clipped, commanding. "I noticed something in your model, the multiplier," Judith began, choosing her words carefully. "It might not reflect the current retention rate accurately." A chuckle erupted from one of the senior analysts. "And you are?" the man said, smirking. "Here to serve coffee, or correct our projections?" Judith's jaw tightened. She pressed the tray closer, letting her silence speak where her voice had failed. Damien stepped forward, his presence cutting through the room. "This is not the time for speculation. We have vetted this model thoroughly. I suggest you focus on your duties." Her heart sank slightly, but she didn't retract. The numbers didn't lie, and in her mind, the error screamed for recognition. She watched as the executives moved on, oblivious, preparing for the live stream, blissfully unaware of the danger lurking in the projections. For a brief moment, she allowed herself a flashback. Years ago, at a prestigious data modeling competition, her corrections had won praise. A single misaligned coefficient had been caught, refined, and celebrated. She had understood then the power of precision, how a fraction could determine success or ruin. And now, here she was, invisible, watching the same danger unfold without authority to intervene. Judith's hands clenched into fists. The room was deaf to her knowledge, deaf to the warning buried in the numbers. She carried centuries of expertise in her mind, yet no one would see it unless she acted. And yet, for now, she remained invisible. Her warning brushed aside, she retreated toward the hallway, letting the executives continue their rehearsal, the crack in the numbers widening silently beneath their oblivious gaze. Somewhere deep in her chest, a resolve formed. This was just the first moment. She would not be ignored forever. The boardroom of Apex Meridian was alive with tension. Screens flickered, data scrolled, and the hum of high-stakes anticipation reverberated against the glass walls. The $750 million merger pitch was less than 10 minutes away from going live. Every executive's gaze was fixed on the slides, on the numbers, on the distant investors who would soon judge their competence with the cold impartiality of capital. Judith Adams lingered near the doorway, her tray now empty, her pulse quickened. The fraction in the growth model, the subtle error she had noticed hours ago, pulsed in her mind like a warning alarm. She had tried once before to hint at it, brushed off, laughed at. But now, with the clock ticking, the margin for disaster shrank with each passing second. She stepped a fraction closer, voice barely above a whisper. The coefficient, it will show false growth. Heads turned, startled by the intrusion. A few junior staffers exchanged uneasy glances. The room froze for a heartbeat, then laughter broke out. Did the caterer just try to talk finance? One analyst snorted, leaning back in his chair. Others chuckled, muttering under their breaths. Maybe she's giving a motivational speech with coffee. Damian Cross's eyes snapped toward her, icy and sharp. The room went silent immediately. His presence alone demanded attention. He stepped forward, voice cutting like a scalpel. "Judith," he said, calm but sharp, "this is not your domain. Return to your duties, or step aside entirely." Judith's grip on the doorway tightened. Her mind raced. She could remain silent and hope the flaw went unnoticed, or she could risk everything by speaking again. The consequences were immense: humiliation, dismissal, being remembered only as an interruption. But the knowledge weighed on her too heavily. She knew the pitch could collapse, millions of dollars at stake, because of a subtle misalignment in the projections. She took a slow, measured breath, trying to steady herself. Her gaze met Damian's, unwavering, firm. She did not flinch, even under his scrutiny. "It's just a small adjustment," she said softly, "but if it's not corrected, the forecast will mislead everyone." The room shifted uncomfortably. Some executives fidgeted in their seats, uncertain. Damian's jaw tightened. He had built his empire on control, on precision, and yet here was a woman, invisible yesterday, challenging his authority today. "Enough," he said finally, his tone final. "No more interruptions. Focus on your responsibilities, or leave." Judith nodded once, a gesture of respect but not defeat. She retreated slightly, blending back toward the hallway, her mind already calculating the timing, the method, the moment when she could no longer be ignored. The countdown on the main screen ticked closer to 0, 5 minutes. The crack in the numbers still whispered to her. Silent, unseen, she vowed she would act, but on her terms, when the world would have no choice but to listen. And in that tension-choked room, with laughter fading and Damian's authority reigning, the seed of disruption had already been planted. As Judith Adams retreated down the glossy hallway, the cacophony of the boardroom behind her faded, replaced by the soft, mechanical hum of the building's air system. Yet she didn't slow her pace. Her mind churned over the projection error, tracing the numbers backward, trying to pinpoint the origin of the flaw. Something didn't feel accidental. A misalignment this precise, this conveniently catastrophic, was unlikely to be a mere oversight. Back inside the conference room, the tension thickened. Damian Cross paced in front of the massive screen, glancing repeatedly at the financials. Senior executives muttered under their breaths, shuffling papers and tapping furiously on laptops. But not all eyes were on the data. Leonard Vaughn, Apex Meridian's vice president of strategy, leaned casually against a polished oak table, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. His presence was casual, but his intent was deliberate. Every subtle glance at the spreadsheet, every whispered remark to the junior analysts had been carefully orchestrated. Judith's instincts flared. She had seen this pattern before in competitions, in academic exercises where rival teams planted subtle flaws to derail competitors. It was a psychological game: create doubt, provoke panic, and let pride do the rest. And she realized, with a sinking certainty, that Leonard Vaughn had done exactly that. The error wasn't random. The coefficient had been manipulated. The customer retention rate had been replaced with outdated data, subtly enough to pass cursory checks but glaring to anyone attuned to its rhythm. The kind of flaw that would shatter investor confidence if left uncorrected, and that would leave Damien scrambling, vulnerable, publicly embarrassed. A brief flashback came unbidden to Judith's mind. A similar incident during her fellowship application. A peer had attempted to undermine her submission, introducing a tiny discrepancy to discredit her predictive model. She had caught it at the last moment, but the lesson had lingered. Brilliance could be weaponized, and the invisible could be underestimated at enormous risk. Back in the room, Damien's sharp eyes caught a subtle hesitation from Mira, the junior analyst. She glanced at Leonard, then at the screen, uncertainty flickering in her expression. Damien, sensing hesitation, barked an order. Double-check every variable. I want absolute certainty. If this is tampered with, I need answers now. Leonard leaned back, letting Damien's anxiety grow just enough to appear natural. His outward demeanor suggested cooperation, but inwardly he was counting seconds, savoring the chaos he had engineered. Apex Meridian's hierarchy was fragile, Damien's control near flawless, yet with a nudge at the right moment, even the Colossus could falter. Judith paused in the hallway, fingertips lightly tracing the cold wall. Her eyes narrowed. She had stumbled upon more than a numerical flaw. She had uncovered a web of quiet sabotage. The stakes had just escalated. This wasn't simply about fixing a projection. It was about navigating a battlefield where trust was rare, and the invisible could decide the fate of millions. Her pulse quickened. She would need to act. And not just for the numbers, but for the man who had unknowingly been targeted, and for the future that depended on it. The clock ticked relentlessly toward the live pitch. In the shadows, chaos had been sown. And Judith Adams, unseen, held the thread that could unravel or save it all. The digital countdown on the main screen blinked relentlessly, 0:45 seconds. The room vibrated with the tension of imminent exposure, a corporate audience watching through countless webcams, investors poised to question every slide, every projection. Damien Cross stood rigid at the head of the table, jaw tight, hands gripping the edge, eyes darting from his CFO to the tech monitors. Every second brought the looming threat closer. Judith Adams, standing near the hallway doorway, could no longer remain a silent observer. The flaw she had noticed, now confirmed as sabotage, pulsed in her mind, each number screaming for correction. She had hesitated, warned softly, been brushed aside. But the clock made the decision for her. Time had run out. Stepping forward, she left the safety of the wall, tray now forgotten. Her presence, sudden and deliberate, drew dozens of stunned glances. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Keyboards clicked once and stopped. Damien's piercing eyes found hers instantly, a storm of disbelief and authority. Judith? His voice was low, controlled, but the sharpness cut through the room. I can fix it, she said calmly, voice steady. But I need the whiteboard. The executives froze. Laughter and scoffs quickly died into murmurs of uncertainty. Leonard Vaughn's smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of irritation. Damien's fingers twitched near the tablet controlling the slides, unsure whether to allow this audacious intrusion. Judith approached the whiteboard, marker in hand. She exhaled, letting her mind recenter, blocking out the incredulity around her. Her movements were precise, deliberate, each line, each number flowing from years of disciplined knowledge. She erased the faulty coefficient and rewrote the projection formula, adjusting retention variables, correcting churn multipliers, and recalibrating the growth curve to reflect real-world customer behavior post-pandemic. The room was silent, the only sound the soft squeak of marker against glass. A few junior staffers exchanged astonished glances, their disbelief mingled with admiration. Damien remained rigid, jaw clenched, but he made no move to intervene. Every correction she made strengthened the forecast, transforming potential catastrophe into a clean, defensible model. Her voice, calm yet authoritative, explained the adjustments as she worked. The previous formula assumed linear retention. Post-pandemic behavior is dynamic. The mid-tier loyalty group now drives growth, not the high tier as projected. Adjusting the multiplier to 0.927 reflects current trends and stabilizes the 3-year forecast. Gasps began to ripple around the table. Mira, the junior analyst, leaned forward, typing rapidly. It holds. Not only accurate, but conservative and defensible, she whispered. Howard Denton, the CFO, peered over the spreadsheet. She's right. This is correct, he muttered. Even Damien's rigid posture softened slightly. Control and pride battled with undeniable truth. Judith stepped back, marker lowered, eyes unwavering. The room, once brimming with doubt and mockery, now hummed with silent recognition. The invisible had rewritten reality in under a minute. Time did not pause, but the world had shifted. Judith Adams was no longer unseen. The whiteboard still gleamed under the conference room lights, marker lines crisp and final. Judith Adams stood a few feet back, arms relaxed at her sides, breathing steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. For a moment, the world seemed suspended. The executives, frozen mid-gesture, could only stare at the corrected formula. Time felt stretched, a fragile thread holding them in place between disbelief and reluctant acknowledgement. Damien Cross remained at the head of the table, fingers tapping lightly on the tablet, his jaw tight. His pride wrestled with the undeniable. The numbers on the screen were accurate, flawless, and they had not been produced by a title, a board position, or a pedigree, by someone invisible until now. The room had watched, scoffed, and dismissed her, and yet the truth could not be denied. Whispers began to ripple through the room. "Did she just?" murmured one analyst, barely audible. Another muttered, that formula is perfect." Even Leonard Vaughn's smirk faltered into an unsteady twitch. His sabotage had failed spectacularly, leaving him exposed, a shadow behind the brilliance that had emerged unannounced. Mira, typing furiously on her laptop, finally spoke, voice shaking slightly with excitement. The corrected projections stabilized the forecast. "It's accurate. All variables hold. This is exactly what we needed." Howard Denton, the CFO, leaned back in his chair, exhaling, a quiet admission of awe escaping him. "It's right," he muttered. "I can't argue. She's right." The room shifted subtly but unmistakably. Chairs scraped as executives straightened, eyes darting between the screen and Judith. Murmurs of acknowledgement mixed with cautious respect, the laughter and mocking that had greeted her earlier now silenced. The power dynamic had changed. She had moved from the periphery to the center, no longer invisible, impossible to ignore. Damien finally exhaled and ran a hand over his face. Control, a cornerstone of his persona, was temporarily surrendered. He studied Judith for a long moment, calculating not just the credibility of her correction, but the courage and skill it had taken to step forward under the weight of authority and ridicule. "Well," he said quietly, voice rough with measured approval, "you've just rewritten the numbers and the rules." A tension-filled pause followed. Eyes that had once dismissed her now considered her differently. Respect, cautious but undeniable, began to ripple through the room. She had proven that titles, suits, and hierarchy could not overshadow clarity, competence, or courage. Judith, still calm, allowed herself a single subtle smile. The invisible had become visible. The underestimated had claimed attention not by demand, but by truth. And in that quiet power, the room began to acknowledge something unspoken yet profound. She was not just a momentary anomaly, she was a force. The boardroom was transformed. Silence lingered, no longer heavy with tension, but charged with realization. Judith Adams could not be overlooked again. Mira, the junior analyst, leaned back from her laptop, eyes wide. Something nagged at her memory as she watched Judith stand calmly by the whiteboard, the corrected formula still glowing on the screen. There was something familiar about the precision, the confidence, the fluency with numbers that most seasoned analysts struggled to achieve. She typed quickly, almost instinctively, searching for Judith Adams and mathematical prodigy. Her fingers trembled slightly as the results loaded. There she was, a young woman years earlier, winning a national modeling championship for predicting complex nonlinear growth patterns. University accolades, advanced analytics competitions, published papers, all pointing to a rare genius that had vanished from the public eye. Mira blinked, then whispered under her breath, "No, it can't be." The boardroom began to notice her hesitation. Damien's sharp eyes followed her gaze. "What is it?" he asked, curiosity mixing with residual tension. Mira hesitated, then finally spoke. "Sir, the woman who just corrected the formula, she's Judith Adams. She was a recognized prodigy in applied mathematics, decades ahead of her peers." Murmurs spread. Heads turned toward Judith, whose calm demeanor never wavered. Eyes scanned her, and suddenly, the room's perception shifted again. The invisible caterer, now revealed as a once-celebrated genius, seemed almost untouchable. Executives who had laughed a few minutes earlier now swallowed hard, their skepticism replaced with stunned acknowledgement. Judith's mind drifted momentarily to her past, the opportunities she had forfeited to care for her family, the scholarship offers she had declined, the years of brilliance hidden behind aprons and trays. She felt a flicker of vulnerability but let it pass. The truth was here now, undeniable. In that instant, the room understood. This was not luck. This was not accident. This was judgment, skill, and years of hidden mastery finally claiming the recognition it deserved. Damien Cross cleared his throat, stepping closer to Judith. "Adams," he began, tone measured, "we appreciate your insight. We'd like to offer you a consulting role, a temporary advisory position, to reward your contribution today." The room exhaled collectively, as if relief had been packaged neatly into a title. But Judith's eyes narrowed. The offer, framed as generosity, carried the weight of condescension. "Temporary. Token. Patronizing. I'm not interested in a title or a token," she replied, voice calm but unwavering. "I ensured the integrity of your $750 million deal, not to be patted on the shoulder, but because it was the right thing to do. Respect isn't granted for convenience, it's earned through acknowledgement of truth." The boardroom fell silent. Damien's jaw tightened. For the first time, Judith had asserted herself not just with brilliance, but with unshakable dignity. Just as the team began to breathe, Mira's voice trembled. "Sir, there's another anomaly." Damien's eyes shot to her screen. The new data set, supposed to finalize the projections, revealed a dangerous flaw, one that could exaggerate revenue and mislead investors. Judith froze for a heartbeat. Every instinct screamed to act, but she hesitated. The first intervention had thrust her into the spotlight. Stepping forward again could risk ridicule, dismissal, or worse, blame if she miscalculated. Her mind raced, replaying every calculation, every subtle shift in the coefficients. The room buzzed with tension, executives murmuring, unaware of the impending disaster. Then her resolve crystallized. Silence was no longer an option. The stakes were higher now. She could not allow the company to falter, not when the truth was in her hands. Judith inhaled sharply, preparing to step forward once more. As Judith analyzed the final projections, a chilling truth emerged. Apex Meridian's growth model, while mathematically sound, relied on aggressive pricing and churn tactics that would disproportionately affect struggling communities. The profits came at a human cost. Her mind raced. Correcting the model to safeguard these vulnerable groups would trigger a cascade of losses for investors and executives who trusted her judgment. Staying silent, however, meant complicity in exploitation. The numbers were no longer abstract. They carried real-world consequences. She glanced at Damien, confident but unaware of the hidden ethical cost. The boardroom buzzed with excitement over the finalized projections, oblivious to the looming moral danger. Judith felt the weight settle in her chest. Right and wrong were no longer theoretical. To act would risk her position, reputation, and the fragile trust she had earned. Yet to remain silent was a betrayal she could not accept. Her choice was clear, if perilous. That evening, Judith sat across from her younger brother, David, at their modest kitchen table. The hum of the city outside was muted, the room warm with familiarity. David, now 16, studied her with quiet curiosity. "You've always done what's right, Judith," he said softly, eyes earnest. "Even when it was hard. Even when no one noticed." She looked down at her hands, worn from years of work and sacrifice. Memories of lost opportunities, unpaid bills, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily. Yet in David's voice, she heard affirmation, clarity, and trust. "It's bigger than me," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "It's about what's fair, about who gets hurt if I stay silent." David reached across, squeezing her hand. "Then don't stay silent. You've got this." Judith's resolve solidified. Her purpose was renewed, not just for her, but for those who could not speak for themselves. The boardroom was electric, every screen glowing, every executive tense. Damian Cross sat rigid at the head of the table, eyes sharp, every fiber of control taut. The countdown for the investor pitch ticked relentlessly, and the weight of expectation pressed on every attendee. Judith Adams stood at the center, marker in hand, heart steady despite the storm of scrutiny around her. The second flaw she had uncovered was no mere miscalculation. It was deliberate, a hidden mechanism designed to inflate profits at the expense of vulnerable communities. Each number screamed deception, each coefficient a moral breach. Whispers filled the room. Leonard Vaughn's smug facade faltered. Damian's eyes narrowed, suspicion mingling with dread. Judith's voice cut through, calm but unyielding. "This model will harm thousands if it goes live. I can correct it, preserve the integrity of the pitch, or I can expose the manipulation. But I will not stand silent." The executives froze. Damian leaned back, jaw tight. The room waited, suspended between fear, greed, and the weight of truth. Judith's gaze swept the table. She had made her choice. The tension that had gripped Apex Meridian for hours finally loosened, replaced by a quiet, electric clarity. Judith Adams stood in the boardroom, her eyes scanning the faces of executives who had once dismissed her. Every skeptical glance, every condescending remark, had been rendered powerless by the undeniable truth she had delivered. Damian Cross approached slowly, his posture cautious, voice tempered. "Judith, your corrections saved the pitch, and potentially the company. You've shown not just brilliance, but courage." Judith's response was measured, her voice carrying the weight of years spent in silence. "I didn't act for recognition or for titles. I acted because it was the right thing, for the company, for those who would be harmed, and for the integrity of the work." A hush fell over the room as the reality settled in. The invisible was no longer unseen. Mira's eyes glistened with awe, and the board quietly absorbed the shift. Later, Judith returned home to David, their bond stronger than ever. He looked up at her with admiration and trust. "You did it," he said softly. Judith smiled, calm but radiant. "No, David. We did it. Together." The future stretched before them, uncertain yet filled with possibility. She had reclaimed her voice, her brilliance, and in doing so, had transformed not just her own life, but the path of everyone who had once overlooked her. In a world that overlooks the unseen, courage speaks louder than titles. Judith Adams reminds us that truth matters. Sometimes the person everyone ignores holds the key to everything. Judith Adams changed a $750 million future, quietly, bravely. Share your thoughts, leave a comment, and subscribe. Celebrate the brilliance that goes unnoticed every day.